What are some of the reasons why some Muslims protest for Palestinians but not for Uyghurs? We are seeing a record number of protests in Islamic countries supporting for Palestinians and voicing support for Palestinians' right to defend themselves. Why are people in these countries silent on Uyghurs when their treatment are arguably much worse? When millions of them are still held in concentration camps? You could add Rohingyas too. They are stateless as well. Because Muslims are centered around white Arabs. Same reason Muslims don't say anything when ISIS wipes out a village of Muslims in Mali or Burkina Faso. Money is a big part in keeping silence, but also no major systematic killings appearing historically and constantly past 70 years. Not at Islamic holy site, further away from the Western world neighborhood, and largely the idea that Chinese territory has mostly been always part of China's sphere of influence land. You need to look at who they're protesting. China is a geopolitical beast with a lot of resources and a reputation for retaliating. If you criticize them, you're going to get trouble. In the Palestinian conflict, the country you protest is Israel. They're backed by the US. But they're small and an easier target for condemnation. Saudi Arabia has maintained a blockade on Yemen for almost a decade. And protest is lighter because Saudi Arabia has money and will fight claims India is currently fighting with Canada. And they too will not back down if you call them out. Arab Muslims does not equal Turkic Muslims. Uyghurs' issue is ultimately a secessionist issue like Tibet. And a lot of Islam countries are also dealing with ethnic minorities trying to break free. Syria, Turkey, Indonesia, Saudi and participate in actively suppressing them, so they don't really have a moral ground there. Most nation-states also don't view secessionists in general very highly, unlike America. I applaud the success of Western propaganda, such that you actually think the Uyghur situation is worse than Gaza. I can expand on your question, not just the protesters. Even the Middle Eastern governments aren't against the Uyghur situation, whereas most of them are neutral, if not pro-Palestine. Are they just conveniently all fools? Or maybe China is so almighty that these countries dare not speak up against it, a feat that even US cannot achieve. There is a racial hierarchy among Muslims. Arab Muslims, Turkic Muslims, Parsi Muslims, subcontinent Muslims, African Muslims. Among subcontinent Muslims, he who is a Sayyid descendant of Prophet Muhammad enjoys a higher rank than a local Muslim. Google Pasamanda and Ashraf Muslims to know more about the caste system among Indian Muslims. P.S. You also don't find any Muslim Brotherhood group fighting for better working conditions for workers from the subcontinent who work in the Gulf nations. Many of these workers have Muslim background. Do people really not know the significance and history of Jerusalem to Muslims? It isn't that complicated. People try to use this as some gotcha argument against Muslims, which is completely nonsensical. A large number of the Arabs who protest in the West are Palestinians. Lack of visual evidence for the Uyghur genocide. Because Palestinians are Arabs and you have multiple Arab states, Uyghurs, Balochis, Rohingya, and Kurds are not Arabs, and there are no other Uyghur, Balochi, etc. states. The whole Muslimic world let them down. Nothing to hear from Saudi Arabia. Nothing to hear from Egypt, Iran or Turks. I think the Saudis and Iranians don't speak out because they would lose oil trading partner number one. Dozens millions of Chinese people make holiday in Egypt, and the Turks are afraid of the consequences too. And the Taliban shut up too, because they need China now. And that lead to the shabby reality that Muhammad cartoons in Sweden led to unrest, and nobody cares when the name Muhammad is forbidden in China. Israel is a territorial dispute. Jews having land that is rightfully Arabs and Islam's. Uyghurs are just in their own trouble. Well, first off, being told that the Uyghurs-China situation is equal or much worse than the Palestinian-Israel situation by the United States that supports Israel, occupied and bombed Muslim lands, and in a power struggle with China certainly have a credibility issue. Secondly, the United States and Israel is seen more dangerous and hatred on than China in countries with majority Muslim populations. Certainly does not help that the land that Israel rests in is also sacred to Islam, and therefore its occupation by Israel and the support by the United States is seen as an attack on all Muslims. Xinjiang is not a Muslim holy land. From what I understand this is not so much support for the Palestinian people, but for the loss of Muslim land after the creation of the State of Israel. The history of the spread of Islam is incredible. In a very short time the Middle East, North Africa, parts of Asia, parts of Europe was ruled by Muslim regents. As with every conqueror, you do not want that anyone else reconquer some of your land. Islamists, and probably normal Muslims, feel the State of Israel is a sore thumb in what they see as the Muslim world, the Old Caliphate. So supporting the Palestinians is supporting the reconquest of Islamic land. It's not about Palestine, it's about Israel. China can kill Muslims just like Saudi kills Muslims in Yemen or Egypt, not letting Palestinians in. Israel's existence is what provoked the Arab world. Another example of that, it's not China power. Some warlords in Africa have killed Muslims but no one cares. We know about Uyghurs because China, it's a country of interest. Ethnicity. They're not Arabs. I'd guess anyway. That and their corrupt gofts like them to blame Jews a Western-style gov. Instead of question them and their way of doing things. Because they hate Jews. Arab propaganda initiatives. The hate for Jews in the Muslim world is real. They always call Jews Europeans and ignore the fact most Jews in Israel were kicked out of Muslim Arab nations and never lived in Europe. In addition, it's seen as a religious war on a religion that should have been cancelled when Islam came. Jews gaining Jerusalem back is considered as a religious insult. It's likely more about support among the Arab ethnicity than among followers of Islam. Your question made me wonder if it could be in the PRC's interest to support Israel a bit more. Because they could claim to sympathize with Israel's problems with Islamic terrorism and have also tussled with the UN on this issue. The PRC's repression of the Uyghur people began after a series of terrorist attacks by Uyghur extremist separatists. Lots of good answers here. But I'll add also the historical force of Pan-Arabism, which is a major factor in why the British Mandate dissolved the way it did in the first place. Support for an Arab Palestine has outlasted much of the original political ideology. But I think much of the root of it comes from this. Curious as to what your sources are other than Adrian Zen's. Because they hate the West more than they actually care for the cause. The reasons I can see. 1. The Palestinians are Arabs, while the rest are second-rate non-Arab Muslims. 2. Israel controls Jerusalem, the third holiest city for Islam. 3. Having Jews control part of Dar al-Islam is an abomination to many Muslims. 4. Jews played a major part as enemies of Muhammad in the Quran and Hadith, unlike the Chinese Indians or Persians. 5. Free Palestine has long been by oppressive MENA regimes as a diversion from internal strife. It's always been about the Holy Land, the holy sites, and Arab nationalism.